everybody hear me if I talk at that sort of volume? Yes, great. Here we go. On my far left, Dr. Jonathan Sapsed is the Principal Investigator for the Brighton Fuse Project and a Principal Research Fellow at CENTRIM at the University of Brighton. Georgina Voss is a Senior Researcher on the Brighton Fuse Project. Juan Mateos-Garcia was the Research Fellow for the project and is also a Creative Industries Research Fellow at NESTA. On my right, Professor Paul Knightingale is the Principal Investigator for the Brighton Fuse Project and is Deputy Director of the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex, and Phil Jones you've met. So, what I'd like to do is to start by asking the panel about the research. What was the one thing that surprised you? What was the thing that you just hadn't expected to come out with? Jonathan, let's start with you.
Is my mic working now? No?
No, break it out. Try that 1 minute, not with me, such a shout.
Okay, how's this?
No, it's
Hello? Okay. Hello everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Especially with the football I'll have to use my acting training, of which I had none. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the most surprising results, we had one particularly puzzling result, I think.
Which I'd pick out. Is that good? Hey! But yeah, it's iteration, you see, it's the digital age. So, so we had one interesting result, which was when we were asking the various entrepreneurs about the barriers to further growth and fusion and innovation in their day-to-day businesses. And we had this surprising result that Phil alluded to earlier on, which is for the larger, higher growth companies actually pointed to the artistic community as a barrier. A small but significant proportion of them, and we were sort of scratching our heads about this because all the other results were pointing to this wonderful combination and fusion of arts and design and technology and so forth. And I think this illustrates sort of why it's worthwhile to actually not only just do a quantitative survey, but also to go and chat to people and interview them and have this face-to-face contact to try and understand some of the context of those puzzling results. So, and it starts to you start to scratch beneath the surface and see that there is this kind of view that a kind of perception of the bohemian nature of some of the artistic community. I mean, we were thinking perhaps this was a few managing directors that sort of tripped over a busker on their way to work that morning. But actually what people were saying is that because of the lifestyle, because of the fact that people come to Brighton for a quality of life, because they're creative, they're bohemian, and sometimes they don't always have that sort of Protestant work ethic that perhaps you want in a high growth business. So so that I think raises some questions that perhaps you'd want to respond to later on. But that was a puzzling one for me.
Georgina.
Oh, blimey. I think what surprised me was something that Phil mentioned earlier, which was that the reasons why founders in particular moved to Brighton for lifestyle reasons has increased over time, even as the cluster itself has grown stronger and more prominent. I moved here 13 years ago, back in 2000, and I moved here from the Midlands, where a lot of people would be like, oh, Brighton, full of unicorns, and the seaside, it'd be brilliant, magic. And I kind of thought, this is it, this is brilliant. And I got here and it was great. But the fact that that element has still persisted and got stronger particularly over the time period that we were looking at, again, is quite interesting and kind of where that balance lies between what's happening in the businesses themselves, but also the attractant factors which bring people to the city as well. Also something that kind of tied into that, which I don't think was mentioned in Phil's talk, the average age of our founders, I think, was about 41, is that right? Yeah, 41, which is interesting when you compare it to other clusters around the UK, in particular the East London Old Street cluster, Silicon Roundabout, or Tech City, or what you would call it, where I think the average age of entrepreneurs there is mid-30s, low 30s. So you're getting kind of a different quality of people who are starting businesses here too, which I think is quite interesting.
I love the fact we've got an academic researcher who talks about unicorns.
So, hi everyone. Yeah, I was one of the, I guess, data geeks in this project with Roberto, who's sitting over there, and Paul. We're used to testing models where we look at relationships between variables. And it's rare to find something as robust as this connection that we have identified between fusion, innovation, and growth. We came into the research, methodological and empirical guns blazing. We didn't know what was going to happen. We have tested this model, and it has come up very much supported without having to do any testing alternative specifications, doing those things that researchers sometimes do, torture the data a bit, trying different measures. No. This is the first time that this happens in my career, and gives me great confidence in the findings that Phil has presented.
Thank you. Paul?
I think I've got,
nope.
Okay. So there were two things that really jumped out at me from this. First was the growth rates, which were huge. So we tested them and we tested them again, and robustly, the growth rates are very, very strong. So this is much, much stronger than I expected. The other thing that really jumped out at us in the results was the importance of arts and humanities. So the traditional view is the arts and humanities are the Cinderella, and it's the scientists, the engineers who generate the economic growth, and our taxes pay for the arts and humanities as a bit of nice culture. And what was really strong here was the arts and humanities are part of the engine room of economic growth in this city. And that was a really, really interesting finding. And that really forces us to rethink how much taxpayers' money should go into the arts and humanities, because they're not just a little addition to culture, they're really economically important.
Yeah. And I'll actually echo that, because I think, you know, what I'd expected was that what we'd find was a group of tech companies who are swimming in this nice sea of arts, you know, that Brighton is. So there'd be arts festivals and stuff like that, and they'd mix with artists, and it's kind of bohemian. But actually, they'd be tech companies, and that would be their relationship to it, fish in the sea of art. But what we did find was that companies themselves are bringing those arts, humanities, design skills, and the founders come from those kind of backgrounds. So, as Paul said, it's actually crucial to the process of building the cluster. It's integral to it. It's not an add-on or a nice-to-have. It is the cluster itself. One other thing that surprised me, actually, which we've never been able to answer, was that I think it was something like 5% of companies said that universities were a barrier to growth. Not that they were irrelevant. 8. I can't understand that at all, to be honest. I can understand why they may say, universities, they do nothing for me. Absolutely understand that. And that may not be true, but I understand it. But a barrier? I didn't understand that one.
Thank you. Before I come out to the audience, I would just like to ask, to what extent do you think this research can be applied beyond Brighton? Those of us who live and work in the city like to think of Brighton as being unique. We have a very specific social geography, we have a very specific physical geography. Does that mean that actually this research really is based on a hopefully unique place, or does it have the wider implications beyond our city? I'm going to throw that out. Go on, Phil.
Okay. I'll start and while you're thinking of your answer, because we asked this question all the way along, and particularly the advisory board had this catchphrase, which was, it's all very well, but what does it mean for Stoke? And Stoke became the epitome of, can you take some of these findings and apply it somewhere else? And for some reason, I'm not sure why, Stoke became the element around that. And we've agonized over this a lot, I think. And, you know, and I think we take different views. My view is that there's basically 3 ways that you can grow a cluster. You can throw huge amounts of money at it, and try and grow it from scratch, and that's what the BBC have done in Salford. You know, they spent £1 billion. They described where they built as a blasted heath before they came along. There was nothing there, that's what they tell us. I'm sure the people of Salford may feel differently about that, but that's one way of doing it, and they'll probably be successful because £1 billion is a lot of money. The other way is the kind of tech city way, which is there was something around Silicon Roundabout, there was something kind of interesting, and what you do is say, there's something interesting there, and we'll throw lots of money at it, and we'll throw Google at it, and things like that to try and make it work. And the third way is the way that we've done it, really, which is we've built the cluster organically from the bottom up without huge amounts of government money, and we still created something which, you know, the Observer had Tech City claiming that they've got 1,500 companies in their cluster, and we're saying we've got 1,500 companies. Ours is probably more robust than theirs, so, but we're at least on a par with Tech City in London, which has got huge amounts. Now, which of those is successful and which of those is unsuccessful, I'm not sure, but there are three different ways of growing clusters.
Yeah, so in terms of what lessons have we got for other places, I think there are, what we don't want to do is say, you know, this is just a unique Brighton thing. The issue, I think, here is the way in which this was an organic cluster, it grew up, and it wasn't a cluster that was pushed by, we're going to invest in this new technology, graphene, stick lots of the money in, and it's going to create this cluster. This was existing technology. So the firms were very, very innovative, but they diffused technology from the rest of the world, and they incrementally built it up, and they had networks which allowed people to develop skills on one project, and there was enough critical mass for them to reuse that on the next project. And that's something which I think can be seen all over the country. The other thing that's really useful about Brighton is that a lot of the reasons for the initial success and start of the cluster were weaknesses in the local economy. So people came down to Brighton because houses were cheap. So there are lots and lots of places around the UK which have weaknesses in the local economy. And what happened with the Brighton cluster is they were exploited in clever ways, and then as the Brighton cluster grew, then organisations like Wild Sussex came and built on the economic dynamism. So there are opportunities to build from weakness, and then as it gets going organically, for top-down policy to help strengthen the cluster.
Yeah. So I guess one thing that's clearly coming from the research, and when you look at the creative industries, is what you see is that talent is at the heart of the generation of value. And the important thing is supporting the sources of that talent, and also find ways of making this talent come to specific places. And I think that's where the cultural infrastructure is really important, and finding ways to make it stay, give it opportunities to behave in these entrepreneurial ways, and in some cases actually just raise visibility about the existence of a cluster in their doorsteps, making them aware that perhaps they don't have to move to London, they don't have to move to Manchester, move to Brighton to get a job in the creative industries. They can do it where they are located. And I think that's where raising visibility, as we're doing with this report here, and other reports could do in other places, can help in that development.
I think one of the other things that comes out of it is the importance of examining clusters as, you know, what unique characteristics they actually have, rather than thinking of them in kind of cookie-cutter terms. There is one model that can, you add an arts festival, you add an incubator, you add a university, and bingo, then, you know, it sprouts up. One of the things that came out for us was, yeah, there is a long-standing art scene here, and again, that's something that's grown up organically. The Brighton Digital Festival has come about through existing relationships. These are things which are already here and can be strengthened by looking at the specificity of what works in Brighton and for Brighton. I guess another thing they'll be thinking about space here. There's been a lot of talk about kind of micro-geographies, so people talk about being able to kind of walk from office to office, or meet in coffee shops, or see each other in the North Lanes. And in terms of talking about office space, some of the people we were talking to were quite clear about how there was actually quite a small physical area where they wanted to locate their business. And it was the kind of thing that if you thought about it in terms of London, it would be ridiculous. It would be, you know, one street away from someone else's, but that was the thing. It's just like, even a 10-minute walk might be a bit too much. So thinking about what that might mean for the city itself, whether it's here, whether it's Stoke, whether it is East London, it's kind of, there are differences and nuances, and simply wiping them all out as some idea of a CEDIC cluster isn't going to work at all.
Yeah, I think there are some clues, I think, in looking at clusters that have fallen away in other places. If you take the case of the BlackRock video game studio in Brighton that was closed down in 2011 here, we've seen 15 so-called Black Pebbles, the startups that were spun off from the workforce of that studio that were made redundant by Disney, which is a pretty impressive response, really, and shows, I think, the resilience that there is in the cluster. And you can look at that in other towns. In Newcastle, Midway was a successful studio, which similarly was closed down. In Dundee, there was also Real-Time Worlds. But in those cities, we didn't see the same kind of spring back in terms of this resilience. in other clusters you can see that kind of resilience. And when I was doing my PhD in the late 90s, I was looking at the Multimedia Gulch out in San Francisco, in the south of Market area there, which at the time was looking like it was growing very strongly. And many of the companies there were actually acquired by bigger concerns like Microsoft and so forth. And then with the dot-com boom, it really sort of killed off that cluster. But since then, that cluster has grown back, and this is really a center in terms of a lot of the Facebook and social media style gaming that you see in that part of the world. So I think, you know, it says something about, you know, both these cities, they both represent a quality of life and are attractive places to live in that do attract and retain the talent. People want to stay and they want to try again, even when you get setbacks like this.
Thank you. Okay, I think we should open this up to the floor. I'm sure people have got questions because we've had an awful lot of information in the last hour or so. So who'd like to start off? We do have a microphone somewhere. Yeah, we've got a microphone here. So if you've got a question, wait for the microphone to arrive with you, and please do introduce yourself. Who'd like to start us off? Question down here in the black shirt. Oh dear.
I'll just speak.
Yeah, please do.
I just wanted to know a little bit about the employment figures a bit, because those proportional figures are a bit can be a bit confusing. If it's grown, you know, much faster than other areas, it may still be from quite a low base. So what I'm interested in is when you talk about, because one of the fears of the new economy is the fact that actually, compared with the older industrial economies, it's simply not going to produce the jobs in the volume that will tackle the persistent unemployment. But what I'm curious about are not only rates of growth, but also numbers in relationship to other industries like the tourism industry and the other industries that are with us, and whether you can throw any light on that and perhaps give us any hope in relationship to that proportionality.
Okay, I can see Juan is actually flicking through. Would anybody else like to take that?
We have the figures for employment in our sample, and that's 3,000 people. Our sample, assuming it is a third of the overall population of CDIT companies as fielded in the presentation, this would give us around 9,000 people or so. We don't have figures about all these other sectors that you mentioned in the report.
Because I think that's a very important factor, isn't it? Because
yeah.
employment and volume of employment is a key component of what will be a beneficial society rather than just a hype society.
It's also about the quality of jobs, isn't it? And you know, there's an argument that the digital or the CDIT economy can produce knowledge economy jobs, which are more are better paid, and it's almost inarguable that they're better paid than the tourist economy, and actually are more sustainable.
Yeah, but how many? That's the point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, Georgina's helpfully pointed out, I think we found the average firm employs 7 people. And I think we also found the average firm is making use of 7 freelancers within the year that we did the survey. So in a way, it's sort of doubling your size over that period. And this is what we're actually looking at now. We want to understand the freelancer economy. How do the freelancers fit in as a kind of reserve army of labour to the creative firms? And this is what we're following up in the second phase of the research. But it's an important question, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a next question, please? Somebody down on the front here, and then we'll come up to the side here. We'll give the mic a try, but if not, I may have to ask you to shout. No, we seem to have a whisper on that mic, so apologies. If you can give us your question, I'll repeat it back.
Very loudly.
Yes.
I'm sure you can, Mick.
Yes, a fantastic report, by the way. I think it's superb. My question is about education, really. Of course, the superfusion of creativity, innovation, and digital technology, if you like, is important not just for the digital sector, but in our 21st century world of work, it's important in any job at all. And if that's the case, and I like the statistic that 90% of people who are innovating in Brighton are outsiders, wouldn't we like to keep more of our own children within Brighton? And so you mentioned, Phil, towards the end, or at the end of your presentation, you mentioned education and how important it was for people it was for people as an underpinning of the kind of skills people are going to need in general in 21st century. But then you kind of threw it away by saying, but this is societal and not something we can do about in Brighton. I beg to differ. I think we can do, as you know, I'm involved in some initiatives of trying to do something about that. I think we can do something about that locally, and then we can show the rest of the country and the world. I was interested in the views of the rest of the panel, what they feel about the importance of education, how in Brighton locally we might address that.
Okay, so the question's about the importance of education in Brighton and what issues need to be addressed.
Is Jim Byford in the room?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
there.
Down here.
The reason I ask is because there's part of the research which looked at a project which tried to embed the creative use of technology in the curriculum in two schools in Brighton, Blattington Mill and Cardinal Newman, and Jim was the researcher on that project. So we were actually trying to look at how you could develop seeded skills within schools in Brighton. So I don't know whether it's worth Jim answering that question. Do you want to answer it?
Yeah, I think in summary, of course it's important, and the learnings really from evaluating how the UK schools sought to embed that into practice. We found a lot of institutional factors about the time it took to get new technologies on the agenda, to ensure safeguarding, for example. We found that the Cherokee schools were already using Edmodo and were very conversant with social networking. It seems to have crossed many bridges that the UK schools found very difficult. But that's not to say that the schools and the teachers weren't very enthusiastic about getting involved in the project. It just took a lot of time. But the children themselves would like to have spent more time talking to the Cherokee children. We managed to get them to Skype, and they did that fairly frequently in different places around the city, including the Amex. And the positive upside of it was that the Cherokee culture and history was relayed to such good effect that it's been embedded in the curriculum of Blatchington Mill. So there's a byproduct there from an arts and humanities perspective, which is very positive. So that's carrying on and will continue. So I think we've learned that there can be spin-offs that aren't necessarily anticipated.
Yeah, no, but I think, obviously I know those projects really well, and I think they're laudable, but it's kind of skimming the surface still, isn't it? I mean, there's a real crisis, I think, in terms of particularly digital technology within our education system, and even at the level of basic digital technology skills. And I just feel that we need to, and it's not just schools, by the way, the whole apprenticeship scene, I think, is fantastically interesting in this. Although I think it has to change. I think, the attempt to do it in the old model is problematic. So it's education generally, not in our schools, and I kind of feel that there's a lot to do yet.
Sure, Juan.
Yeah, I was originally involved in a project called Next Gen that sought to basically identify bottlenecks in the creation of talent for the video games and visual effects industries. And what we found was basically what you're talking about, that there were many challenges in the teaching of education of digital technologies at school. There was this siloed mentality that kept, arts away from technology, and that's just only in schools before even getting into universities. I mean, we have tried to play a double game you know, a long game and a short game in trying to address those bottlenecks. The long game, the short game has been policy action, and actually we have lobbied to try to get computing into the school's curriculum and substitute and replace it. Use it to replace IT, which was a subject which was generally very much focused on teaching young people how to use Microsoft Windows applications rather than actually doing any of the computing that we see playing a role in these industries we have been talking about here. And computing is now in the curriculum and it's going to be included in the EBAC, which is going to be used to assess schools in league tables. There's still, this doesn't address the separation between technology and the arts, and this is something that we have really struggled to deal with within existing frameworks, i.e. within the national curriculum. And what we have done at NESTA is actually start a program that's trying to almost like infiltrate schools, you know, and do basically activities after school, where we are trying to encourage young people to engage more creatively with digital technologies. The program is called Digital Makers, and there's quite a lot of activity going on around that area. You can go and check the website and see how you can get involved with all of this.
Thank you. I'm going to move on, I think, because we've got more questions in the room. Lady up here was next.
Yep.
Go for it.
Hi. I have a question about the contrast that the most successful company are the one called SuperFused, which have their selling point as mixing technology and creativity. But that when you show the meetups, the grassroots stuff for people to develop their skills, it's very, very pigeon, oh, it's tech. And my experience as looking for work in the Brighton digital cluster is that the roles available are very, very pigeon, oh, it's creative one side, tech one side, and it's near to impossible to find an interdisciplinary role. And I have an interdisciplinary profile. And I was wondering if you have any data about it or like feedback from the company. I was wondering, is it because people from a mixed background are so rare that they just don't think about creating role? Is it because they have, for some reason, a distrust of interdisciplinary thinkers? Or is it because such roles they have tried making them and it's been proven by experience that they are not financially viable, so they stop doing them? Do you have any idea?
Crikey, yeah, Paul.
So we find exactly the same thing that you're experiencing in our data. So we find that there is huge value within firms from the integration and the fusion of different disciplines. But when people leave work, they live in very discipline-based communities. And it's for exactly the reasons you highlight. It's difficult to manage the process of integration. And firms find it very, very difficult. Universities find it very, very difficult. And schools find it very, very difficult. And it's something that we all have to work on because it's very, very clear from the data that it adds a lot of value. Now, I've just come back from the research councils and they're working very, very hard to do it. I work in an interdisciplinary research unit. So looking at this panel, I think there's 6 degrees from where I work, which is SPRU. I think the University of Sussex, an institution like COGS, which was the School of Computer Science, was also COGS was integrated with philosophy, and it was, you know, one of the unique institutions in the UK where you had technology coming together with the arts and humanities to develop some really globally cutting-edge research. So it can be done. It's very, very difficult, and it does create exactly the problems you highlight about, well, who do I speak to when I go for a job? How do I get promoted when promotion is based on disciplinary structures? What degree do I get? How do I, if I want to be trained after I leave university, which department do I go to get this training from a local university? It's very, very difficult to manage, but we have to learn to manage it because it's where the value seems to be created.
Anybody else would comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to reiterate, I mean, from a university higher education point of view, you know, the whole system is really set against this kind of interdisciplinarity in terms of the research excellence framework, in terms of the way our universities are structured. If you want to set up a course that is involving people from different faculties, then you get into all kinds of arguments about, you know, how is this going to be accounted for? How is it going to be validated? Are you being validated by the right accreditation bodies to fit with the discipline? It's very difficult, and it gives the universities, you know, a kind of innovator's dilemma problem. that perhaps others, other forms of training providers can exploit, I think, which is something that we all need to be aware of.
Question down the front here, yeah, and then on the back.
It's John Patty from the Arts Council. I think two observations. Firstly, one of the really interesting pieces of research which you've dug up is the difference between traditional cultural organisations and our SuperFused digital organisations, our SuperFused companies. The SuperFused companies in the survey were seen to be the most fastest growing, weren't they? And right at the bottom of the growth list were traditional cultural organisations who were mostly seen to be unfused. That's really, really interesting that's an interesting message to get across to arts organisations and arts funders and stakeholders in the room. That's something that we need to do something about quite urgently in terms of arts organisations or cultural organisations and how they organise themselves and train themselves and sustain themselves. They're not necessarily part of this really exciting growing economy. And that's something quite interesting. The second observation is we see this, the Arts Council sees this as a much wider, deeper and longer and more, a richer mixture of sectors than the digital creative industry companies, those digital companies, those big ones. We see Brighton as being a place where you've got City Camp, a fantastic, socially mediated, socially centred, digitally driven, but mainly about socially centred activity, organisation, which does feed into this, to this cluster, but it comes from a different direction entirely. So, you know, there are characteristics of the cluster here which are really about the place that Brighton has been since Harry Cowley first squatted houses after the First World War. Since My Brighton, the first Museum Interactive was made in the late 1980s. Since Snooze turned around media from the floor and guerrilla media, we have a long history of these kind of socially activated, revolutionary kind of creative media activities. And we need to think a little bit wider than characterising a media sector on its turnover or its growth ratio.
Okay, anybody want to respond to that? No? Okay, there was a question, this first one, guy in the suit, and then coming to the black t-shirt, and after that.
David Bruce from Cultural Fluency. You contrasted three kind of models. The Media City, which was really driven by the BBC initiative up in Salford. The second one was Tech City, where there was some kind of corporate incubation that worked as well. And the wider Sussex, the Brighton Fuse Project. Would it be your view that the wider Sussex initiative, that the cluster would work better without the involvement of any kind of big corporate incubation? Or do you think it could have benefited from that kind of input or incubation support to produce a faster rate of growth of the companies that you referred to?
Okay. Phil, I think that's one for you initially.
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't confuse or just fuse wired Sussex with the cluster. Wired Sussex is part of the cluster and tries to represent and support the cluster, but it isn't the cluster. The cluster is the companies and the organisations and all the elements that go to make it up. Who knows, actually, whether we might have grown even faster. And those are pretty spectacular growth rates, to be honest, with more public sector funding. I like to think that, actually, by growing organically, we've managed to maintain a sense of place and what's special and important about our cluster and what differentiates it from others. And John quite rightly spoke to some of those just now. You know, we all appreciate, and that's what I was trying to say in the piece on ambition, that actually it's not purely about economics. There's more to life than that. But it's also clear that now we've got to this size, we need infrastructural support to continue to grow it. I mean, it's absolutely clear that we need better broadband, we need better workspaces and elements like that to enable the sector to continue to provide jobs, not just for us and for young people, but to talk to Mick's point. You know, now we've created this cluster, we've got an obligation actually that the next generation, our children, can work in it as well.
That wasn't quite the focus of the question. It wasn't public investment from public sector bodies. It was more the private sector, commercial companies like we see in Tech City, like Cisco, for example. You know, I'd be interested whether you felt that investment from the private sector could be a useful accelerator or an incubation device to support what you're doing in this kind of cluster.
Yeah, I mean, I think George has done more work around Tech City than probably anyone around here, but my understanding is that actually Tech City has had a significant amount of government and public sector funding.
It's had a lot of big corporate incubation support as well.
Sure, so Google are there and, they don't have to pay tax, you know.
George, do you have anything to add to that?
I think there's a combination there of it both. I'll shout, it's fine. I mean, the Tech City Silicon Roundabout story is interesting anyway, because it's not quite this thing that had government money thrown at it. It was something that, again, actually very similarly to Brighton, kind of layered up in really interesting ways, going back to probably the 1920s or so, where you had this kind of really interesting mix of conditions, almost, I don't know. The comparison I have in my mind here is about making a lasagna. You get the layers kind of building up until the top. So by the time the attention started to be focused on it back in about 2008 or so, what was there wasn't just this thing that had sprung out of the ground like a mushroom. It was actually something that had a lot of kind of, again, natural organic growth that had gone in it, but then it attracted government attention. And what you saw then was both government investment, but also strategies around attracting external foreign investment too. So it's kind of this two-pronged strategy that tied it over as well to the Stratford site in East London. So again, it's more to say the East London story is a bit more complex than it just had private sector funding thrown at it, or it just had public sector funding thrown at it. It was this kind of this double-pronged approach to try and stimulate the cluster, but from these different ways as well, which is very different to either the BBC story or to what's happened here as well.
Okay, thank you. So it was chapping black t-shirt and then going over to John over here.
Hi, I'm Jamie from Conscious Business People. What I've heard tonight is actually amazing and fascinating. The awareness that I had no idea half this was going on. I've actually been in your office as well.
Yes, you have, haven't you? You should have asked me.
It's fascinating. It feels like a massive opportunity. And I kind of wonder, it's our own question, it's like, what could or should we do about it as a community, perhaps?
Interesting question, yeah.
Given this opportunity, what should we do about it? Well, one thing is very clear, the council should improve the amount of office space that's available. So that it stands out as a big constraint. I think that there is a lot here that can be built on. I think the firms, and particularly the larger, more successful firms, need to grow. I mean, the previous question point about large firms, it would be great to see some very large firms. And there they need to think about how they capture value. So there's a lot of value being created in Brighton, and it's diffusing out, which is great for customers of the services at Brighton, but we need to, as a community, find ways to capture that a bit more. I think the work of Wired Sussex and other bottom-up initiatives to build scale so that kind of resources are reused, I think is important. And then there's a brand element of it. So, this is a very, very successful cluster which has been on my doorstep, and I've lived in Brighton, for a decade, that I wasn't aware of. So I think there is a kind of, there's a Brighton brand that could be built here. But there's key issues, more office space, there are issues of access to finance, there's issues of access to talent, there's issues about keeping people, and there's a kind of maintaining a very, very interesting interaction between the economic aspects of this, which I was quite surprised to be kind of brutally entrepreneurial, and a very distinct non-economic culture which helps in the integration of knowledge. And that's a kind of a unique feature of Brighton which works really, really well. So building on that would be very, very useful.
Anybody else? What else? Well, it is rather, yes.
Yeah, okay. I think I'll shout again. I'll build on Paul's final bit and also what John was saying about as well. One of the things I think we've talked less about today, although it was actually quite a core component of the research, and I think it comes through in the report, I think, was again looking not just at... Sorry, okay.
Sorry, take...
Okay,
sorry.
Mike. One of the things we looked at in the research in particular, so it wasn't just about businesses, but actually again about the bigger ecosystem, about the communities that were there, where kind of the tech crowds hang out, where the arts crowds hang out, some of the stuff that John mentioned about how the arts organisations themselves work with technology or not, as it may be. One of the things, I guess, that makes me a bit nervous, which I kind of want to lay out, is that Brighton is still kind of, housing can still be very expensive here. You know, it is cheaper than London, but that doesn't necessarily say that much. It's still, you know, university fees have gone up as well. Rents can still be high. It's not just mortgages either. And there are kind of these, you know, these interesting and fascinating kind of pockets and streams and communities of activity that are going on, but they happen outside of private sector activity. So some of the things I just kind of quickly want to give a nod to, the Build Brighton hack space. One of the things that I found fascinating was that a lot of the final year art students at Brighton University had worked with Build Brighton to get the technological know-how for their projects up and running. Build Brighton has worked with artists as well, but that's not something that you start to capture when you just look at this from a purely kind of a growth and a money point of view, but there's value there. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about in terms of fusion, in terms of this kind of bringing together of creativity and arts and tech. And I also kind of want to be just mindful of kind of power imbalances as well between potentially art scenes and tech scenes as well. Again, to give a shout out that it is Ada Lovelace Day, so we think about where different power dynamics lie in arts and tech as well. But that, you know, there's the bigger picture there about not just letting this be a tech story, a private sector story, but thinking about where shifts of power lie around this as well. So just to be mindful of that, to be very mindful.
Sorry. Hang on, sorry.
A bit of a rider to that. So there are things that you sounds like you guys feel that should happen. I kind of wonder how we make it happen.
Okay, can I park that and come back to that very shortly? Because I just want to take John's question because he's been waiting for a while, and then we'll come back and use that as our roundup. John.
So we've heard that the cluster is really dominated by service industry, it seems. And the limiting factor in that seems to be what you can charge out as a day rate. I'm wondering how that compares, if it's a weakness or a strength to other areas. So doing a back of the envelope calculations on the numbers you've given us, it seems like the revenue per head is somewhere between 70 and 80,000 a year, which is very small when you compare it to, say, Google or a big tech product company, large cost of internet.
Anybody want to comment on that?
So is it a strength or a weakness?
Well, it's both, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess the answer to that is it's both. And one of the strengths of a service sector is that you know, it's not dependent on large amounts of funding, and it's not quite so volatile. So it's both. It tends to be more stable, and you know, we've seen very little in terms of impact of the recession on the sector in Brighton, and in part I think that's because it's a service sector which could enable it to flex, but also it makes it more difficult to scale. You know, we've done some work, and when you talk to service companies, they all say, we actually want to be product companies. They all say that because they want to make money while they sleep, you know, and they want to scale and things like that. Actually, when they look at what you need to do to be a product company, many of them decide that they don't want to be product companies, because the advantage of being a service company is you're actually dealing with lots of different creative challenges from your clients, and that it may be something that interests and inspires you, whereas product companies are about actually having one product and just refining and refining it and getting better, and it's more kind of process driven. So it may be, you know, it may be one of the challenges of the sector that the creative people are more interested in a service economy than a product economy. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we are almost out of time. So what I wanted to ask the panel to do was just to give us, I think, calling on the question we had just now, what is the next step? What should the businesses sat here tonight go away and do that responds to this research? Or where should the research go next? Jonathan, do you want to start?
Well, I can talk about where the research goes next, because we do have this follow-on funding project, partly which is looking at the freelancer economy to understand how they fit with the firms, but also we want to repeat the survey. So the reward for the people that filled it out last year is that you're going to be asked to do it again, but this time we can offer a reward in this case, and a donation to a charity of your choice. So that will give us some really interesting data in terms of the dynamics. We can start to see, what's rising and what's falling over time in terms of the data, and so that's the sort of the research challenge. But I think it's a great question, and about what we can all do to move on the cluster and to address these barriers.
I know I threw that one to you just now. Did you?
I can do a quick other thing. Okay. I think this actually comes back to the question that the lady asked earlier about being kind of everything, in both places, but no places, of being multidisciplinary. I would like more consideration both in companies and in research of what these kind of interdisciplinary roles mean. I know the term, and I'm sure many of you have used it, or some of you are employed as this, the term creative technologist gets bandied around, but it can be used as a swear word sometimes as well. There's a great and I think angry blog post from one of the seniors at Wieden and Kennedy from a few years ago that basically takes it down, but not necessarily in fair or useful ways. So I'd kind of, what are these positions? What do they look like? How do you support people there? What kind of training is he doing? Are you bringing in coders and getting them creative? Are you bringing in illustrators and teaching them other facets? And but I'd also want robust academic research to back that up, to start thinking about how can businesses support that, and how can these roles exist in wider spaces too.
So in terms of research, I really would like to see this type of research replicated in other places in the UK, because that's really when we can start to get a sense of whether this is a unique thing, is it happening in other places, how does it look different when you have a large company, say for example HP in Bristol, is it a different cluster in that sense? So I would like to see this applied in other places. In terms of policy, I think we're talking here about, and this relates to the question before about whether reliance on services is a weakness of a strength. I think relying on services is great when you don't have many competitors, and the way to make sure that you don't have many competitors is by innovating. The question here is, how is the policy framework supporting innovation by fuse companies? And we know that there are many barriers there in terms of the type of expenditures which are eligible for research and development tax credit. Perhaps some of you have had to struggle with the forms. All the training issues that we have been talking about, access to finance, and all of these areas. And I think we really need to push forward in terms of changing policy, and this type of research where it produces hard data that we can take to the officials as well as the politicians is going to be really useful. Thanks.
So kind of takeaway messages, I think the takeaway message is Brighton is good, it's done well, but there's still a long way to go. There's still a long tail of people who aren't earning very much money, so there's a lot that can be done. How to do that? I think build on the strengths, so fuse more. I think next step should be the sector should fuse more with the council and the LEP to address some of the problems that are constraining growth. I think that's an important issue. I think the firms themselves should integrate more and think about how they can themselves strategically build up the sector. So there are spillovers that they could work on. And I think finally there should be more fusion between the local sector and the universities and other providers of education, because there does seem to be a bit of a talent gap, and that is something that I think the local area is very, very well placed to address.
Yeah, I think from Wired Sussex's point of view, what we need to do is use the opportunity of this research to really tell the story of Brighton to people who can help us grow and make the cluster more successful, and partly that's politicians. So partly that's about speaking unto power, and that's what we were doing last night when we were trying to, when we were talking to people from the Home Office, the Cabinet Office, and meeting with Ed Vasey and David Willits and all these kind of people, but also to take the story around the country. So I'm doing a bit of a roadshow, Newcastle, Manchester, Bristol, talking about the Brighton Fuse to companies there, but also to others there, because I think, the more we build on the success that we've got here. And, you know, for all its challenges, this is an incredible success. The more that we can attract more talent, and we can attract, and your companies can attract more clients, and we can attract more investment, which will enable those product-driven companies to grow. So it's Wired Sussex's job to get out there and use this as a tool to really sell, you know, the superb strengths of Brighton's digital and CDIC cluster.
But what can we do to help you as a community?
Ooh. Why don't we talk about that in the bar after it's over?
Yeah.
Should we do that? Because I could do with a drink, I've got to be honest.
I think actually the other thing you can do, we all should be doing as a community and as a business community, is spreading the word. This is a huge piece of research that's, you know, actually very important to our city and to our business economy. There's 300 people in the room tonight. There's an awful lot of businesses who aren't. And I think if you can be out there using the hashtag on Twitter and on Facebook, Brighton Fuse, download the report, encourage other people to download it and interact with it and understand it and to act on it. And I think that will actually help bring us together as a community and as an economic community to take it forward. So I would really encourage people to go out and share it and carry on the conversation. Do join us in the bar afterwards to do exactly that. But yeah, carry it on in the months coming up. So that would be my take on that question. So, with apologies for some of the sound issues this evening, I hope it hasn't spoiled your enjoyment and your ability to hear us. Please join me in thanking our panel, Dr. Jonathan Sapsed, Georgina Voss, Juan Mateos-Garcia, Professor Paul Knightingale, and Phil Jones.